Hey there, my fellow author. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, an old soul kind of writer living my dream as a full-time author and authorpreneur. But I didn't start out living a confident, creative lifestyle. I struggled with the fears and the mental and emotional barriers that so often plague writers at all stages of their author career. But the truth is that with the right knowledge, tools, and training, you can overcome those barriers. I'm here to teach you how I've developed a lifestyle that's allowed me to publish 19 books and counting. Each week, as you tune into the Confident Fiction Author podcast, you'll get clarity on the steps you need to take to advance your writing career. Whether it's developing your ideal writing routine, tackling new skills like dictating your fiction, or overcoming the obstacles life throws your way, this podcast will help you live a more confident, creative lifestyle. Let's get started. Hey there, my friend, and welcome to this episode of the Confident Fiction Author Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and today I want to talk to you about how you do not need fancy gear to dictate your novel. When I was first looking into dictation, like Dragon Dictation was all the rage, and I knew authors who would buy like a digital recorder and maybe a headset or a microphone that they could plug into it and record their words and then upload them into Dragon and have them transcribed. And when I started looking at the price tag of all of those, it added up to about $1,000. So Dragon was like $700 or $800 to buy the software. And you remember like when you actually bought software and you plugged it in CD-ROM into your computer and downloaded the software, like I'm talking about that kind of Dragon back then. And so you would buy it. And then I looked at digital recorders and they were pretty pricey. Like you could get a cheapo one, but it didn't hold very much and it didn't hold up well. So by the time you did that and a mic, I was looking at like $1,000 investment to get started with dictating my fiction. And I don't know about you, but I just wasn't in the place to be able to do that early in my fiction writing career. And so that kept me from dictating my fiction for years because of the cost. And, I said Dragon, like back when you had it on CD-ROMs, like today, Dragon's still $700 to get it and download it to your computer. So the ticket price of getting started with dictation really held me back for several years because honestly, I could make the investment, but I was worried that if I did, would I actually be able to make that transition from typing to speaking my fiction? Like mentally, could I make that shift? And that's why in 2013, I shared in the last episode where I tried a trial version of Dragon Anywhere just to see, could I mentally make that shift and be able to dictate my fiction. And I failed miserably. And I was like, okay, well, dictation just isn't for me. Glad I didn't spend that $1,000 to get all of the gear. So I talk a lot about the mental training, and we'll get into that in my dictation boot camp. But let's just talk today about the gear, because here's the secret. You do not need any of that to dictate your novel. You do not need Dragon. You do not need a digital recorder. You do not need a fancy microphone to be able to dictate your fiction. You already have what you need. So in today's episode, I'm going to share how I got started with nothing but my smartphone and how you can skip that overwhelm and start dictating without spending a dime on gear. Let's get into it. So the myth goes that you need a high quality microphone, maybe one that costs you $100, $300. You need Dragon software and complicated setups to get started with your dictation. And I say this myth, a lot of times we kind of build these myths in our heads based on what we hear other authors doing. They're not saying you have to do it the way that they're doing it, but we just start getting this vision of this complicated setup on our desk that looks more like a sound studio than an author's desk. And that in itself is overwhelming. You're like, I don't know how to do audio settings and soundproofing my area so that I can get good audio quality to dictate my fiction, or I can't get a fancy headset microphone that I can take with me out on walks and plug it into my $300 digital recorder and be able to dictate my fiction while I'm out walking. And then there's that dragon thing that a lot of authors have talked about, and it's really complicated and it's a pain to set up and train. And plus, it's really pricey. And you know what? I'm just going to keep typing my fiction. So that was me. That was my story. And that may be the myth that has built up in your head around the gear aspects of dictating fiction. And that may be why you have given up on dictating fiction, but you can't quite fully give up on it. That's why you're listening to this podcast episode. You're like, what is it? What is the key? What's the trick? How do I dictate? How do I get around the technical blocks and this gear in order to be able to dictate my fiction? So that's where I was at. But then I discovered I could just use what I had already on my smartphone to get started with. And guess what? That's still how I dictate fiction. I never did buy Dragon. I never bought expensive microphones or a digital voice recorder to do dictation. So all of those things I thought I needed back in the early 2010 to 2013, all of the stuff I thought I needed in order to dictate my fiction, I didn't need, and I still don't use any of those today to dictate. And I've dictated 14 books now, 11 of them are published, and more on the way. So let's talk about how dictation success really does come from training your brain, not buying gadgets. And that was the thing in 2013 when I finally got a smartphone. Yes, I got my first smartphone, 2013. And I think it was the iPhone 4 or something. And I was like, okay, I finally have a gadget that I can use to dictate my fiction. I can download the app Dragon Anywhere, which they had a 7-day trial version where you could try it out for free. And then it was like $15 a month. I don't know what it is now. It's still around. But I was like, if I can dictate, if I can get this going, it'll be worth that $15 a month in order to dictate my fiction. It sounded a whole lot better than spending $1,000 just in initial tech setup to get started with dictating my fiction. So I gave it a go, and I gave it an honest try. I dictated some lines, maybe even could call it a scene. It was very short. I do remember that. I wish I had screenshot of it, but I had no idea I would be sharing this story with you all of these years later. But I did give it an honest shot, and I posted on Facebook. I was like, this is it. I am going to be a dictating author. I'm going to dictate all of my fiction. And then it went nowhere from there. I would go back to it and I was just like, oh, no, brain doesn't work that way. And plus I had a technical glitch. My phone, I thought it was Dragon doing this, but it was actually my phone would cut me off after 30 seconds and I would have to restart the dictation function. And I'm like, what's the deal? Why can't I do this? I'm at another block. So even though I have a smartphone and I can get apps now, which are so cool, I still cannot dictate my fiction. So I was into that technical hurdle, but really the real problem was that I was convinced my brain doesn't work that way. And I was like, okay, I can spend all of that money to get a real setup for dictating my fiction, but I've already tested it out. I tested it out and I cannot speak words of fiction. And so what I want to tell you is that if you have encountered that, and especially if you've encountered technical glitches, and that just solidifies it for you. You're like, okay, I've hit this technical glitch, so I definitely don't need to go down the path of dictating my fiction. I just want to encourage you to push past the technical challenges, because once you've done those, then you can focus on training your brain to dictate your fiction. And it is a learned skill. Just like you learned to handwrite, you learned how to type, learning to speak your words of fiction is a skill that you can train yourself to do. So being able to dictate is not about having the gadgets, it is about training your brain. So keep that in mind. The other thing is keeping your technical setup simple so that you are more likely to actually use it. And that's something that when I'm training authors, they get into some complicated processes. And sometimes to work around your tech, you've got to have multiple things that you're doing, but generally not. Generally, you can keep your setup very, very simple so that it is easy for you to get in there and start dictating your fiction. If you overcomplicate it and you have, like I said, that digital recorder that you're having to make sure you plug in your microphone and you've got batteries charged and all these things. And do you have it with you when you're out and about, or like with me, about to wash dishes? I don't carry around a digital recorder, but I pretty much always have my phone within arm's reach. I read a statistic the other day where it said 90% of adults always have their smartphone within arm's reach, which, whether that's a good thing or not, we can talk about on another podcast. But the fact is, we generally always have our phones close by. And so keeping your tech simple and having it available on your devices, whether your phone or your computer, is so important. Like, make it really easy and simple to dictate your fiction. And that is really one of the keys to being successful in making the transition from typing your fiction to really dictation is your go-to. That's the first thing you go to when you have an idea or inspiration or you're sitting down for your writing session. If your setup is simple and easy to use, that is what you're going to go to with writing your fiction. And so a part of that, thinking about having that perfect setup, having the mic gear and the software and all the gadgets to dictate fiction. And you may be thinking, once I have that, then I can really get momentum and I can work on training myself to dictate fiction. And I just want to encourage you that momentum really comes from getting words down, not chasing the perfect setup. So that's why I encourage you to practice your dictation and don't get hung up. Don't get hung up on the technical aspects of it. Find something that works for you, which I do cover in my trainings, getting a setup that works for you so that you can then gain that momentum by getting words on the page, speaking them, and that's when you'll really get rolling with dictation. So it's really tempting to fall down the rabbit hole of Amazon and looking at headset mics or scrolling through the app store and trying out all the different recording apps or speech-to-text apps and softwares that you can use, or thinking you need to go buy Dragon and spend that money, and then you have to spend all that time training Dragon before you actually get to the point of dictating your fiction. And that's what I like to eliminate for authors. Let's just keep it super simple. Use what you already have to get started with dictating your fiction. And I cover this more inside my trainings, but just know that if you have a smartphone or computer, you have a built-in speech-to-text or dictate function on those, and you can absolutely just fire those up and use those to dictate your fiction. So remember, start simple. That is the fastest way to succeed with dictating. Do not let tech overwhelm block you from starting. That kept me. I was hung up on that for so many years that I regret letting that stop me from dictating, because the fact is, if you can talk into your phone, you can dictate your novel. All right, wrapping up here. If today's episode has debunked that myth that you need fancy gear and expensive software to start dictating your fiction, then you are ready for the next step. And that is my dictation boot camp. It kicks off October the 14th live. I will be in there for 3 days training and giving you assignments, including getting started with your tech that you already have, whether that's your phone or your laptop. And we will really focus on taking those first steps without the tech overwhelm. So one of my students, Amber, who was in one of my early dictation boot camps, she used the methods that I taught and dictated 1,500 words in 4 short sessions in a day, all while spending time with her kids. That is the kind of freedom and momentum you can have when you keep the tech simple with dictating your fiction. So the Dictation Boot Camp kicks off very soon. It's only $37 to join. Enrollment is almost open. It's coming very, very soon. So head over to fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp to join the wait list and then get into the Dictation Bootcamp and discover how simple your dictation setup can really be. And I'll just say, I think your future self will thank you. That's all for this episode of The Confident Fiction Author. I will see you in the next one. Take care.